Hello and welcome back to another episode of 0 to 60. In this video, I really want to I want to answer some questions. Since we announced that we're doing the turbo-lamic conversions back in December, I have had so many questions from people that are thinking about doing it, wanting to understand how to do it, and even trying to get their head around different options. Because there are different ways to achieve this transmission swap, not just with turbo-lamic, and we'll talk about those as well. Before we get into answering the questions, I want to give everybody a bit of a background on myself. So I've been doing YouTube videos since 2016. 2019, I bought a BMW, probably the worst mistake of my life. But I come slightly obsessed with trying to make it go quickly. And after I bolted some China turbos on, we found out that a automatic transmission, the one that was in that car at the time, the ZF6HP21, wasn't going to be up to the job of what I was trying to do or what I was trying to achieve with the car. The 6HPs, they got released around 2000, and while they were a brilliant upgrade from the 5-speed transmissions back in the day, and I guess not too dissimilar to these, but they are a little bit more mechanical in some sense, and I'll talk about that later in the video. But the 6HP just wasn't going to cut the mustard. Now, at the time, no one was doing the larger 6HP swaps into the N54 cars, which is what I had, and I started looking into DCT swaps, and also, Dan from Simply Tuning, I don't know how he managed to do it. Back in 2017, he busted out a 9-second pass with an M54 using a power glide. So he went the other way. Instead of looking for newer technology, he looked to the 50s and he managed to make his car really fast. I actually ended up buying that car, and while it was an absolute powerhouse at 700 wheel horsepower, running it through the power glide on the streets for daily use, it was terrible. It really was great at going fast in a straight line, but terrible for cruising around town. And anyone that's had a automatic that's built to go fast, built to go down the track, knows what it's like. The converters that you have to use to get them off the line quickly, they slip. And when you're riding around town making 50 horsepower idling, the converters are just laboring up, and the engine's making all this noise, but the car's not moving. And I just didn't like it. You couldn't react quickly to traffic with the lazy torque converters. And yeah, anyway, I don't like them. I don't like lazy torque converters. I don't even like torque converters unless they've got clutches like these ones. But what I ended up doing, I actually went for the DCT. So back then, the 8HP swaps were not very common. 2021, doing some research, what's the best way I can do this? DCT. I ended up putting a DCT into my car, and that car, which was making around 620, 630 wheel horsepower, worked fine when the car was moving. So if I got the car rolling and then put the power down, the DCT did what I needed it to do. But trying to launch it from a standstill, which the channel's called 0 to 60, we started off doing 0 to 100 acceleration times, and the DCT wasn't great at that. I managed to get 1 or 2 good launches, but it just felt like I was hurting the DCT. The DCT clutch packs, which I'd love to have out for you guys. In fact, if you want to see what a DCT clutch pack is, I'll put a link to the video where I pull one apart. But the actual clutch surface area in a DCT is not massive. Now, there are options to upgrade the clutches, but it's quite expensive. The cost of even an entry-level DCT clutch upgrade is about what you can get one of these transmissions for, the 8HP 70s, the entire transmission that has a lot more clutches in it. Now, that evolved into doing my first 8HP swap early 2022, and I need to thank everybody that helped make that happen. It was done through the channel, and without all you guys, I wouldn't be in this position right now, where I've become Mr. 8HP, it seems. Now, that first 8HP I did it using the turbo-lamic. There were a few options at the time for 8HP swaps. No, that's not true. There were 2 options, the HTG and the turbo-lamic. Something that I am quite fortunate with, being a YouTuber, generally when I picked people's brains from all over the world, guys that were going fast, doing different things with the vehicle, I got honest responses, and the Lamic seemed like the way to go. Now, luckily, one of my wonderful subscribers also knows Lucas Lamic, and I was able to ask him direct questions on a friendly level about the reality of using this transmission controller. If you've looked into issues with 8HP swaps, which I would recommend you go and do if you're looking at doing it, do some research, find reviews on different controllers and how it works, you'll know why I was hesitant, but it seemed like I couldn't really pick any issues with the turbo-lamic controller, and that's what went in my car, and I haven't looked back since. The reason you need a controller, in fact, let's get into really sorting out what this video is about. If you're going to do an 8HP swap, you need to work out a few things. One, the main thing, is which transmission you're going to put in your car. There are, and I'll put a link to the Wikipedia page for the 8HPs, and it lists all of the different vehicles that were fitted from the factory with a ZF 8HP gearbox. It does also cover 8HPs that were made by other manufacturers under license. A lot of the Jeep gearboxes were not made by ZF, but is essentially a ZF gearbox or a ZF design. The reason I wanted to highlight that, the non-ZF gearboxes seem to have issues as they get older that the ZF-made gearboxes don't have. In fact, considering how many cars have the ZF boxes, and these have been in BMW since around 2010, 2011, you don't find a lot of issues. And it's kind of good, because when you want one that's second-hand, there seems to be a lot available, because all the cars that have them from the factory don't really need transmission replacements, which wasn't the case with the 6-speed transmissions. Anyway, you need to work out what version of the 8 HP you're going to put in your car. So the first thing I'd recommend you work out is whether you need to go for the big boy, the 8 HP 70, 75, or 90. But the 90 is not so necessary, and if you're curious about why I don't think the 90s are as necessary as they were a couple of years ago, I can go into that in another video. But basically, you want to work out if you want to use the big boy box or the basic entry-level 8 HP box. So the 8 HP 45, 8 HP 50, or the 8 HP 70, HP 75. The difference between the two is purely power handling. And when you put them side by side, the 8 HP 70 is significantly a bigger box. The whole drum assembly, the clutch packs, everything is bigger. The shafts, the planetary gears, everything is much stronger. Everything's made to handle a lot more torque, manage a lot more heat, and it's the big boy box. The reason I wanted to talk about that, with the introduction of the A90 Supras and everybody trying to have the new fastest Supra in the world, they are fitted with an 8 HP 51. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's an 8 HP 50 series. That is the baby box. Now, those guys started to run into issues when they broke that 800 wheel horsepower issue. And a lot of the issues in the early days of trying to break the record was the factory TCU. It limits torque, and it just doesn't want to handle this much power or that much power efficiently. It doesn't want to deal with it. The factory programming was never, ever written to handle over 500 horsepower, and that's when you start to have problems. Now, there are options to build the 8 HP 50, 51s, and in my uneducated opinion, but just what I've learned from people that are actually doing good things with cars, it's a lot of money. I don't know. If you're in a position where you can run an 8 HP 70 or a 75, it makes so much more sense if you're over that 500 horsepower mark. But if you're under 500 horsepower, if you're in a car like a 4-cylinder diesel that isn't making that much power, a 45 or a 50 transmission is definitely worth looking at. In Australia, it's a huge difference in what they're worth. It's nearly half, which is kind of cool. I do plan on putting an 8 HP 45 into my 320D, and of course we will document it on the channel. But that car is a standard car. I use it for daily driving, and a 70 is just overkill, even though it would bolt in. So once you work out if you want to go for the entry-level box or the big boy box, it's then working out which box is going to fit your vehicle. So far here at Simply Tuning, 8-Speed AU, Leeson Engineering 0 to 60, we've put one of these 8 HP 70s into an E46 BMW. We've mounted one into an R33 Skyline. We've mounted one into a S15 Silvia, and an S14 Silvia. I hope I get that right. And an S14 over there. So we've actually mounted them into a few different cars. Now, all of them had plenty of tunnel clearance for the BMW N57 box. The bell housing on the 6-cylinder diesel boxes is quite small, and we haven't had issues apart from Brock's S15. So he has a 1JZ, and he's got it particularly low and particularly far back, close to the firewall. And that meant that we did need to do a custom trans tunnel to fit this transmission in. I guess probably one of the best ways to work out if it's going to suit the application you're thinking is jump onto the guys' websites that do the adapter plates. At 8-Speed AU, we're going to try and keep all of the common ones in Australia. However, we've got Domiworks, HPR Tuning, PMC Motorsport. There's a few guys that are making adapter plates to accommodate these 8-speed swaps into a huge range of vehicles. But you know if they've got an adapter plate already made, it's probably going to work, but you can also ask those guys if they're going to need to make any other modifications to the vehicle to fit it in. But it will also let you know which version of 8-speed to go for. I think I mentioned it earlier, but we use the N57 from the BMW. It's a relatively small casing for the 70 and 75. The bell housing's pretty small, obviously coming from a straight 6 BMW. That's the one we use the most. However, we're doing a couple of LS swaps that are coming up on the channel, and for that we're using the N63 BMW 8HP 70. It's got a larger bell housing and it works better on the V8, especially with the starter locations on those LSs. So there's a few things that go into it. Once you've worked out which version of 8-speed you're going to need, which adapter plate you're going to use, it's then a matter of working out how you're going to control the box. These, although I think they're quite simple now, they are fully electronically controlled. In fact, we have a valve body there, and then the brain of it, the TCU here, it literally controls the 9 solenoids that are on the valve body, moving oil around, and that's how it gives you all of the gear ratios. In fact, a couple of them are for the park brake and that sort of stuff. It is simple but complex. The software that controls it all is mind-boggling, and I think that's why there's a few horror stories out there with certain transmission controllers. I'll leave it at that. Now, we like the Turbolamic. It actually replaces the factory TCU. This here is a wireframe. I'm going to call it a wireframe, but it houses the factory TCU in here, and I'll try and put up a picture of ones I've done in the past where it shows how small the factory TCU is. It looks just like an Arduino sitting in there, and it's actually a full CAN bus integrated. It's a very clever bit of kit, the factory TCU, and we pull it all out. Now, the reason we pull it all out comes back to the issues that I was having with my car back in the day. The factory TCUs are limited. They were never designed to handle as much power as what we've been putting through them, and definitely not as much torque. And the problem is, to get these to shift well, the only thing the computer can see when it's trying to work out how to make it shift is the input speed and the output speed. Unlike the DCTs, the 8HPs don't have pressure sensors, they don't have clutch position sensors. It's just how long does it take the output shaft to react to the input shaft. It knows obviously which solenoids and which gears are engaged, and then it calculates a smooth transition between the gear, or an aggressive transition between the gear. When you're making more power than BMW anticipated to be put through these things, the factory TCUs run into issues where you hit torque limiters, and there's just a few things that go on and then they stop doing what we need them to do. Alternatively, when you have full aftermarket control, you can do things like a trans brake. Now, a little bit of that, let's be honest, has probably come from the Dodge Demon, which uses an 8HP. Using the Dodge Demon trans brake logic in the Turbolamic, you get a proper trans brake. But then with the Turbolamic, we also have a clutch pedal that we can implement. So the E46 drift car, and I'll put a link to that build up in one of the corners, that car has an actual clutch pedal. It blew my mind the first time when I drove it that you can put your foot on the clutch and you can take up, and it's just like you're in a manual. The way that the Turbolamic works, it doesn't rely on the torque converter for much. In fact, I'm pretty confident, and don't quote me on this, but when you start in first gear, it just uses the clutch packs within the gearbox to do take up. It locks the converter straight away. When you use the clutch pedal, obviously the converter is locked, and then you're relying on the clutch packs in the gearbox to do the take up. It's really such a different way for an automatic to work. I don't know why we call these things an automatic gearbox. I guess it's because in an OEM application, there is no clutch pedal, and it does all the shifting. It automatically shifts, but it's not an automatic like a traditional automatic. In fact, I wouldn't mind doing another video separately to this that talks about how these gearboxes really work on the internals. We'll get into that into another one. The other controller that I am quite interested in maintains the factory BMW TCU. It's the CAN TCU one. It is the way I think of it is a CAN bus interceptor. So it basically sends the CAN signals that the factory TCU would expect if the gearbox was still in its OEM application. It can emulate what the BMW engine computers were sending to the gearbox, and then you can run it in essentially anything. And I've seen those CAN TCU installs in quite a few different vehicles now. Kenneth, I think, is the man that runs it, and he's putting his heart and soul into making that work. And I think it's good. In fact, I want to use it on a few of our lower power installs where we don't need to do anything cool like race applications or clutch pedals or trans brake, that sort of stuff. I think that CAN TCU does have a purpose, just not in the high power applications or high torque applications that we've been playing with, but we'll see how it evolves down the track, and we will try and keep the audience updated with our investigations into CAN TCU. It's definitely something I want to play with. So yeah, I guess once you've worked out what gearbox you're going to use, what controller you're going to use, you need to work out how you're going to control it. So the E46, we actually use one of these DCT shifters. This is to emulate the feel of a sequential gearbox, and it's fairly close. It takes a lot of force to get this thing to shift. I'm going to try and make it click on camera. But it's still not quite as aggressive as sequential, which is probably a good thing. It's much easier to change a gear than a sequential. They're great for race applications, especially if you're drifting where you're going to have opposite lock on and you need to be able to smash that handle without too much worry and know that the gearbox is going to change gear. The install that I did in our car back in early 2022, I used a factory BMW shifter, not too dissimilar to this. The benefit of using this style of shifter on the conversions is you get 3 modes straight off the bat. So you've got your normal D for drive or basic comfort mode. You can switch it into sport mode, or then if you manually shift this, you'll enter manual mode. That works through pretty much the same for both the Turbolamic and the CAN TCU. Alternatively, with the Turbolamic, they actually come with a program switch, which we have on this wiring harness here, and this gives you 8 different shift modes or drive modes. It's probably overkill for most people out there. However, in the past on our car, I had the different shift modes set up for different shift points. So if I found that the car was breaking the tires loose too much, I could set a lower RPM for the shift points. And obviously when you're trying to go fast, you've got super aggressive shift still, but it would shift at a lower RPM where the car wasn't making quite so much power. And it was great for switching on the fly while you're at circuit and coffee racing on track, having a bit of fun. I like it. I like having 8 program modes. Now, aside from working out how you're going to control whatever controller you're using with the different shifters, you've also got to work out how to get the power to the ground, whether you're going to need a custom tail shaft, that sort of thing. I'd say it's pretty fair to say in most applications that aren't from a car that had these transmissions as standard or nearly like these as standard. So the car that we did the conversion on back in 2022, I actually managed to use the factory drive shaft. With the adapter plate, the diesel transmission, we ended up at the same length as the original petrol automatic. It's gonna be unlikely that's happening if you're putting it into a different chassis like a Patrol, a Cruiser, Silvia, and blah, blah, blah. So you're gonna need custom tail shafts, custom trans mounts and that sort of stuff. If you've got any questions about that and you can't quite work it out, obviously hit me up below and I'll let you know if I can think of a solution that you can buy off the shelf. Alternatively, at 8-Speed AU, we will have different universal mounts that we'll try and make in a way that can be adapted to a lot of different chassis and hopefully make it as easy as possible. But yeah, guys, that's probably it. The biggest thing that most people are asking me about is which version of transmission to use and which controller. Hopefully I've covered it in this video. There are different ways to go about it, but a little bit of research, you'll quickly work out what's going to work best for your application. So hopefully that's going to cover the basics of what most people need to consider when they're starting to think about doing one of these transmission swaps. Yeah, basically, which box is going to suit your application the best, what's going to be the easiest one to mate with your engine and your chassis, which controller to use, and then how you're going to control it. It's kind of simple, but unless you know what to look for, I guess I understand why a lot of people don't realize it. Now, the other thing that I just want to talk about quickly as well is torque converter choice. The majority of ones that we've done so far have all been with the BMW diesel torque converters. These things are quite a tight torque converter. Obviously, the BMW modern diesels, they have turbochargers that make boost from nearly 800 RPM. So the torque converters are designed to lock up pretty early. Now that is great for efficiency when you're driving around town, but if you've got a 4-cylinder turbo motor that you're trying to make big power that doesn't spool until 5,000 RPM, these converters might not work for you. The cars that we've put them in, we can get them on the trans brake spinning at 4,000 RPM. They're not supposed to, but you can sit there on the trans brake at pretty much 4,000 RPM, which is more than enough for the cars that we've had them in to make boost. But I am aware of guys with those 4-cylinder engines where they can't get them over 2,500 RPM. So torque converter choice is something that you do need to take into account depending on your application. I really like these. These seem to do well for the 6-cylinder turbo motors. The 6-cylinder petrols make enough power to spin them before they even make boost, and once you're making boost, you can push through the torque converter maybe a little bit more than you should. But on the same note, things like the Turbolamic controllers, they have now got implementation for launch control, where when you're at the start of your drag race and you're doing a launch, it will lock the torque converter and use the clutches to let the engine spin up into the power range. There's a reason we're selling this controller. It is really good for all applications, but just something I wanted to make a note of and something that you should probably think about if you want to go drag racing. That's probably the main time that the converter is important, when you want to slip it on the trans brake, because I do think a trans brake launch is better than a clutched launch with launch control, because then it essentially launches like a DCT, and although these clutches will hold, they appear to hold a lot more power and heat than a DCT clutch, it's still not as smooth as using a trans brake to get off the line, in my opinion. Guys, hopefully that's answered a few of the basic questions on how this install goes about. Like I said, I'd love to do another video on how this works between the power coming in and the power coming out. There is a great ZF promotional video that we'll probably go through. But yeah, aside from that, once you've got all that worked out, it's a matter of putting it all together and getting it in the car. If you've got a Turbolamic, you do need to, well, we recommend using the PCB. You can just use wires. But yeah, this basically goes in place of the factory TCU in there. It all goes back together. You put it in the car and you drive it. There's no tuning. There's no nothing. We can basically provide you with a base map that'll get your car moving, and then much like a factory transmission, the Turbolamic continually adapts. And that is important because, as I mentioned earlier, the only sensors in the box are input and output speed, so it needs to continually adjust the shift patterns to suit the clutch wear. But even the temperature of the oil, it all comes into how well these things will shift, and that's why I think the Lamic works so well. All right, We've got a lot of 8-speed stuff coming, although it's not what this channel is completely about. So we're going to be doing some cool race car stuff as well and trying to have some fun behind the wheel in the next month or so. Guys, thank you all for watching. Any questions, obviously, in the comment section below. If you want to get your hands on any of this gear, check out 8speed.au. We've got it. We will hopefully have the transmissions on the site in the next 2 or 3 weeks, although getting these 8 speeds is becoming a bit scarce in Australia, but we've got plans. We've got plans. All right, thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. How'd you go? It's really hard having a conversation with yourself.